You're welcome, everybody. Now, the last time we were together, we continued with our first lecture, and by going into some more important observations about poetry, we attempted to make us realize that poetry has a functional social presence, and it is something that allows us to actually show all about what we want to do within a very short space of time or encounter. And then we went on to let us realize that poetry is just as imaginative as it is scientific. It depends on how we go about it and the skill we approach that. It's basically imaginative because, of course, it is the point of genre making where we can really find out language in its very defamiliarizing manner. That is, language as a way of speaking, a way of realizing communication, verbal communication, that is not quite the way it is done on daily basis, on the street, on normal basis of linguistic usage. It is a way in which language attracts you to itself, yet making a very pungent, scale of communication. We have looked at all these things, and we have also made us to realize that in creating poetry, we might not be as spontaneous, just like William Wordsworth said. It wasn't wrong, but that was just within a particular scale of poetic rendition. It wasn't wrong by saying that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It wasn't wrong. But then the point is that in some other context of creating poetry, you actually take time. It is very, very scientific. It can be very, very much of a labor creating poetry. And that labor has to do with all about what you are putting into it. The truism of what you are putting into it in terms of circumstantial, factual, and emotional truism. And then you also want to arrest consciousness with the length and the manner you go about what you are creating. Now, having said all this, we want to look more into poetry as a performance, not just as a genre. We have talked about the fact that today in literature, we talk about poetry as a genre of literature in which we have some ways in which language can be very defamiliarizing, but at the same time, it's a way in which language brings up information in such unsuspecting and riveting manner. It is often stanzaic, it goes with stanzas, it goes with a lot of linguistic presence that brings you into a lot of imaginative context where you are actually in the world of imagery, okay? And it has the properties of music, it has the properties of drama, entertainment. It is something used in so many contexts, and therefore we can argue that poetry is perhaps the most functional of all the genres of literature as we have them today, as popularly known. Although on this channel we have been able to make us to realize that definitely these genres are definitely going on. We can't stay where literature stops at prose fiction, poetry, and drama, the way it was brought to us right from the neoclassical period. Now we are having all forms of other genres. For example, I can tell us that we can have poetry in the subgenres of graffiti making, in the subgenres of the title of anything you even want to name, the title of a post-fictional book, the title of a business, the title of a brand. We can put poetry within these subgenres so that we might not necessarily always have very, very emetic ways of dealing with poetry or prose fiction. What we had known about prose fiction had been that you have it as something that is fictional, something that is imaginative, but realized in the short story, in novelette and novels and all that. Yeah, but then today we can talk about the prose of blogging. Blogging is a very short way of telling stories, telling things, or giving information that goes within certain short forms of rendition, coming to the perspective of what we can call the short story, or even something more brief, something like the flash story. The flash story is even something that is not as wide, as extended as some short stories can be. This one is often very much, restricted, something of a short span within its volume. So, and that's why we often find a number of blogs, coming in and being posted. Now, coming back to poetry, how can we go beyond just necessarily having to write a known kind of genre that is poetry, but also be poetic? We can be poetic in literally anything that has to do with language. Poetry helps us. This was what I didn't emphasize the last lecture. I'm going to put it here. Poetry helps us, apart from being an immediate source of creative expression. We've talked about that in the last lecture, and something very much immediate than the other productions of genres. It is therapeutic, it has musicality and all that. We can say that poetry is a very versatile form of writing or form of communication that can be realized in any form of language expression. For instance, we can realize poetry in graffiti productions. We can realize poetry in titling of books or films or brands or a number of things like that. We can realize poetry within some other genres. We can be poetic while writing prose fiction. We can be poetic within drama. As we remember, William Shakespeare's dramatic pieces that you have read, Macbeth, As You Like It, Julius Caesar, The Tempest. Check the language, the way he was actually writing in his time. The language of Shakespeare's drama is definitely poetic. In fact, you can call it poetry. I can say that drama is a kind of mask in a way, because it is a kind of performance form whose language is indebted in poetry. It's nothing else but poetry. The only thing that makes it dramatic is the dialogue, dramatological features of, dialogue, of characterization, of staging, and so on and so forth. But then, reading Shakespeare's play up till now is still a written thing, okay? And it's the poetry of that language that has arguably made it very memorable. For example, check utterances like this, like in Julius Caesar, where you hear things like cowards die many times before they are dead. The valiant taste of death but once. That's poetry. You hear things that have to talk about the fact that you can always expect certain things to happen as you move into them. And then poetry allows us to get into that situation. For example, when Macbeth goes towards killing Duncan, he makes a statement, something very, very memorable, something very, very haunting. He says, I go and it is done. The nails invite me. Here it's not Duncan, it says the nail, something like that, that calls you to heaven or to hell. Can't get in verbatim now. But then the emphasis is the poetry, something that is always there. Now, we want to talk about poetry in every scale that we use language. We can use poetry as graffiti, as the language of graffiti. If you are into, textile branding, or you are in the graphic arts, you want to advertise your product, you want to make it sellable in such a way that it will stand out, it will be memorable, poetry can be at your service. For instance, here's something like this. Somebody wants to advertise thyme. Thyme is a kind of, it's used for cooking. The spelling is a kind of condiment, something you add into cooking, and people enjoy it a lot in preparing some very interesting, very wonderful, very tasty delicacies. And then the spelling of the thyme we are talking about is Thyme. But then An imaginative person wants to write time in a poetic way, to call your attention to something you are used to that rhymes like time, which is time, T-I-N-E, and then that person wants to give you something that is very, very electric because of your knowledge of how a particular idiomatic expression is used with the word time. Something like a stitch in time. A stitch in time saves 9. Okay? And then this poet who is advertising and who is putting language to that brand on the billboard or whatever, on the advertisement, paper, is creating a kind of poetic content through advertisement language and say something like this. What we are familiar with is stitch in time. People can just put ellipses there, saves 9. And this person just writes is stitch in time, T-H-Y-M-P, and put ellipses there. It can be very, very, arresting, so to speak. It can be very, very, inviting to that very brand of product. Let's look at another way in which poets can be experimental with short titling, like the graffiti. You know that the graffiti, with that stretch of language, a stitch in time, can also be put on vests. Let's say the marketers of time are going out and they put on a vest with a stitch in time, advertising what they have. People are likely to be fascinated by what is being advertised, and then they want to look at what you have to say about that particular product. So poetry can be at the service of advertisement. Now that's on graffiti, and you can have graffitis, for example. Let's say you are within the religious atmosphere, let's say Christianity, and these Christians are going out on, a particular crusade, or they are going out on a particular program, and so on and so forth. And then they put on a vest that you can find on everybody in different colors and all that. But what you find on the vest is very, very striking because of the power of the rhyme, that they have brought on the vest. Now, you see the first line, N-O, starts with the first line, and you find that N-O within that same line. Then the next line is K-N-O-W, no. So you are finding no in both cases. But the first line goes like this: no Jesus, no peace. That is, if there is no Jesus, there is no peace. But the next line goes thus: no Jesus, no peace. That is, get to know Jesus, get to know peace. That can be arresting. And a number of graffiti depictions can be very, very poetic, and so on and so forth, as it has to do with advertisements, propagations, things that are not within the known thing that we call poetry as a genre today. Now, concerning book titles, some of the most inviting ways, like we have mentioned some time back, is to have a writing a fantastic title on your book, on your poem, on your poetry collection, on your prose production, on your drama, your film, whatever the case may be. We even went as far as saying that in academic writing, if you knew how to couch your title very much, it can be very inviting. And if you know how to follow on, you have made it. Now, let's look at how poetry can be very interesting about forming titles and then going on to what you want to write. Now, we have said something like this: poetry is very hinged within the language of defamiliarization. Defamiliarization meaning that you don't write, or it is not expressed in the language you normally encounter, or the way you'd have encountered it in normal usage of that language. Now, one thing about defamiliarization is that you change the expected logic of what you are writing. The expected logic of what you are writing. For example, we can say you have defamiliarized how you present the sequence of a particular thing when you use language in a very unexpected way. Unexpected way will also mean that the way people would have associated the collocation of certain words within certain thematic or subject matter trends It's not the way you arrange it. For example, we can say that it is logical, it is coherent to put the Bible alongside anything that is Christian, or to put the Sultan or the Quran along anything that has to do with the Islamic or within non-Islamic orientations. You can also put certain words within certain contexts that are really not expected, but what you are trying to achieve is the arrest of the audience. What do? Imagine titles like this. Notionally, conventionally, America is understood as a Christian nation. I'm talking about the United States of America, or let's say the American continent. The association, somehow certain spaces in the world as associated with certain ideologies, certain, myths, and so on and so forth. Not quite like other spaces where you have a whole lot of things jumbled together. Let's say in the cultural field, it's a highly multicultural space that you can't really say that Nigeria, for example, is a Christian state. It is not a Muslim state. You can't say that people don't practice their traditional religion. So if you put certain words within Nigeria in terms of the religious, it can go because it is highly multi-religious. But then there are some places that are dominant, that have the dominance of certain cultures or religions as they are known. For example, the Middle East can be argued to be dominantly Muslim, and the West can be proposed to be dominantly Christian. Now, let's try a very intriguing title that will shock anybody at the first instance when you approach a particular novel. And all you have simply done with the title of that novel is to defamiliarize our own notion of the collocation, the ideological or orientational connotation that would have gone with this particular line. For example, you are trying to talk about somebody in association with America, and the title goes, or maybe the person you are looking at in that particular book is somebody very unconventional, somebody very radical, perhaps somebody proposing a kind of neutral cosmic view within this particular space. And then you write an intriguing title like this, The Sultan of America. Imagine a novel with that kind of title. I am sure you will look back. I am sure you will want to know what this is all about. I'm sure you want to turn and read the blurb about that, simply because of a poetic play of changing the familiar orientation of certain words with other words, bringing in something unfamiliar, but making it a striking sentence. Let's look at another idea that we may possess. Let's say somebody writes something like this. Somebody tries to do a particular killing with words and saying something like the Goliath and the roller skates. Goliath and the roller skate. Okay, Goliath is a biblical figure. The roller skate never could have existed within this time. But there is Goliath on the roller skate. You want to turn that thing around, or you want to give a kind of intrigue with context and material, context and the materiality of something. You write a title like this, maybe for a film now, okay, that will sell on Hollywood or other platforms that are selling the products of new films. And then the title comes up like this: AI and the Village Chief. AI, artificial intelligence, and the Village Chief. We know that the AI is one of the latest productions of technology. But anything we say about a village chief, even if he exists today, somehow transports us to an anthropological past of a pre-technological, pre-literate society. Even though we have not mentioned the time of that village, the space of that village and all that, just that collocation of AI and the village chief might stir something like fun within you. You want to look at what this person is trying to say. You want to look at what the story is all about. And that is where your creativity comes in. If you can follow up with what we have talked about in the past few lectures, on how to write a very convincing, arresting prose fiction, you have won your day for that kind of thing. And so many other things we can bring into poetry. Poetry can help you even when writing prose fiction. Poetry is very important. The poetic voice can be very important when you are describing. All you have to do is to get into, the cosmos of the imagistic, of imagery. And then you are metaphorical, you are, all those styles of making things defamiliarizing can be brought into, even prose fiction. You can describe somebody in such a way that it gives a very graphic thing. For example, what about calling a 19-year-old person? You are saying she was very full of herself as far as her imaginary beauty was concerned. She could be a toothpaste model at 90. And you keep going on like that, and you have a way of tweaking language to get into where you are heading towards within the plot line. You are doing something very helpful within the storyline. Let me just round up with this, please. Just excuse me. Now, we want to say this to add up to this. Writing, especially when we are doing it with the creative, is often experimental. You can add up something dramatic into the prose. You can do what I would call dramatic poetry in the way in which you bring in the dramatic genre within poetry. If you have read Wole Soyinka's Telephone Conversation, it's poetry, but honestly, all you find there is satiric prose fiction on the bigotry of racism and then the shortcomings of those that are fixated within it. It's all drama. It's funny. It can be highly satirical. Okay, you can find situations in which, even in poetry, you bring in the narrative and then you jolt it at times with the unexpected. You are being poetic. Poetry is all about using language in a very unexpected, imagistic, imaginative way that calls a special attention not only to what you are transmitting, but to the very language itself. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. I will ask us to please share this with your friends, subscribe, and definitely like it. Thank you very much.